New digital scan of the Titanic has offered an unprecedented insight into the ship's final moments.
The Titanic has whispered secrets from the deep before, but nothing like this. At 3,800 meters below, a new discovery has surfaced that rewrites history. For years, the world accepted one version of the tragedy. Now that story is falling apart. The ocean did not just hide the ship, it hid the truth. Join us as we uncover the truth hidden beneath the sea, the lost truth beneath the waves. For a long time, the story of the Titanic seemed like it had been thoroughly covered in documentaries, books, museums, and films. People thought they had learned everything there was to know about how the ship sank, what caused it to happen, and what remained at the bottom of the ocean. However, the actual truth was still waiting to be discovered deep in the Atlantic Ocean, nearly 4,000 meters below the surface. In complete darkness and silence, the Titanic was hidden there, preserved and out of reach for humans. That is, until the year 2025. In 2025, there was a significant change, not due to exploring further underwater, but because of a different perspective. Instead of relying on human eyes, the Titanic was examined using advanced digital technology. The breakthrough was achieved through a combination of technology, curiosity, and collaboration between deep-sea engineers, National Geographic, and Atlantic Productions. Their ambitious goal was to create a detailed digital map of every part of the Titanic wreck, including rails, shadows, and bolts. This was not created for amusement or just to wow people. Its goal was to find the answers to long-standing mysteries that have fascinated historians, divers, and Titanic enthusiasts for more than 100 years. It was time to uncover the truth about what happened on that chilly April night in 1912. The team used a small group of underwater robots with special cameras, lasers, and 3D scanners. These robots moved slowly and carefully in a grid pattern, meticulously surveying the site. They spent weeks gathering every small detail, capturing over 700,000 photos from various angles. In total, they collected 16 terabytes of visual data. However, this project was more than just collecting data. An engineer likened it to bringing the Titanic back to life in digital form, rather than physically. When the initial pictures were combined to create a complete scan of the Titanic wreckage, even the experts with the most experience were unable to speak. The front part of the ship, known as the bow, was still standing proudly and majestically. It was pointing in the same direction it had been facing towards New York over a century ago. The railings were slightly bent, but remained intact. The portholes on the ship looked like blank eyes staring out. The anchor chains were still coiled up as if ready to be used once more. It seemed as though the ship had stopped moving, not come to an end. However, only 600 meters away, everything suddenly changed. The back part of the ship, known as the stern, was in complete chaos. It was a jumbled mess with decks collapsing on each other and steel beams all twisted out of shape. The engines and boilers had been torn from their places and thrown across the ocean floor. What had happened here was not just damage, but severe and heartbreaking destruction. In between the two halves of the ship were over 5,000 items scattered like a trail of tears. This path was filled with shattered furniture, torn clothes, dishes, tools, and personal possessions. These remnants captured the tragic final moments of the Titanic. For the first time in history, people were able to magnify and see small details up close, such as a rusty gear or a child's shoe in the mud. They could also read faded markings on objects and count the screws on machinery. Scientists were able to analyze where each item landed from a shipwreck, allowing them to reconstruct how the ship broke apart in a step-by-step manner. This process not only told the story of the shipwreck, but also provided evidence to support it. And what was discovered challenged some of the long-standing beliefs about the Titanic's sinking. One of the most surprising findings was how the ship broke in two. Contrary to popular depictions in movies, the breakup was not a sudden, clean snap. Instead, it was a slow, messy, and brutal process. The ship creaked and contorted as steel supports buckled and decks crumpled in an uneven manner. Machinery was scattered across the ocean floor as the stern twisted and turned while sinking. On the other hand, the bow descended peacefully and quietly, almost as if it was still trying to reach the surface, eventually settling deep into the seabed. The contrast between the two halves revealed another insight. The reason why expensive silverware from the fancy rooms was found alongside tools from the lower working deck was because everything got mixed up during the chaotic descent. The detailed scan clarified everything. With each dive of the submersibles, they found new things. They explored rooms that had never been seen before, Some rooms had furniture that was covered in sea dust but looked like it had been frozen in time. In one hallway, there were melted wires hanging like spiderwebs. In another hallway, there were broken bunks with luggage still caught in the mess. By looking at these images, researchers were able to determine where people may have been, where they may have tried to hold on to something, and how fast the fear likely spread. However, the most significant mystery was yet to be revealed. The question remained, what truly transpired below the ship's main deck, particularly in the engine rooms and electrical systems? This is where the battle to rescue the ship took place. Ultimately, the scan provided the much-wanted answers. The final sweep of the robotic submarines targeted the deep, secluded area of the ship where crew members were trying to prevent disaster in the last moments. The scan uncovered something remarkable. Evidence of intense heat was evident, with metal melting and machinery appearing to have exploded from the pressure. Despite the devastation in the engine rooms, signs of efforts made by crew members to salvage the situation were clear. The scans revealed instances where crew members had attempted to restart systems or transfer power. In various areas, switches were found frozen in the midst of being turned. Burst pipes and abandoned tools indicated that the crew had left in a hurry. Additionally, a bent ladder suggested that someone had descended even as the ship was falling apart. The clues revealed a different perspective on the Titanic's last moments. The event was much more intense than previously believed, and the bravery of the engine room workers was even more remarkable. While others were panicking or trying to escape in lifeboats, this group remained behind to help others survive. In the depths of the ship, they continued working in difficult conditions as the chaos unfolded. The Titanic's story is not finished yet. In fact, it is just beginning again. This digital map allows us to see the full truth with incredible detail. Every part of the ship reveals a piece of the real story, not just myths or guesses, but the actual truth. For the first time in more than a century, the Titanic is no longer just a memory at the bottom of the ocean. It has been brought back to life in the digital world, appearing real, clear, and able to communicate. Titanic's forgotten sacrifice. For over 100 years, the Titanic has been a symbol of tragedy and mistakes made by people. We have all watched movies and read books about it. We are familiar with the scenes of passengers trying to get on lifeboats, the ship sinking into the cold sea, and the musicians playing as the ship went down. However, there is something that has been overlooked in most retellings of the story. Deep inside the ship, away from the attention above deck, something extraordinary was happening, but was not well known until recently. Thanks to advanced three-dimensional scans created using over 700,000 high-quality images, a brand new narrative has emerged. This story isn't luxurious or focused on fancy meals or impressive staircases. Instead, it revolves around fire, steel, and hard work. It's about men who were trapped deep within the ship and had to make an impossible decision. It's about displaying courage in the midst of unavoidable peril. The Titanic was more than just a luxurious ship. It was also a powerful engine at sea. With 29 boilers and over 150 furnaces, it housed some of the largest steam engines of its time. The engineering section of the ship was a complex network of tunnels, pipes, and roaring fires. The environment was hot, loud, and dangerous even on peaceful days. The workers in this section, including stokers, trimmers, and engineers, were resilient. They endured long hours in extreme heat, feeding coal into furnaces and ensuring the engines ran smoothly. Their vital role was often unnoticed by passengers, but without them, the ship would not have been able to move forward. On the evening of April 14, 1912, the Titanic hit an iceberg and caused 6 of its compartments to fill with water. The men working below deck were not ready for the tragedy that followed. The ship started sinking and water began flooding in quickly. Despite the chaos, the fires were still burning and the engines were still running. It seemed like someone was doing their best to keep the ship afloat. The individuals in question were the men below deck. The scans revealed a surprising discovery. Instead of the metal grates bending outward in boiler room number 2, they were bent inward. This indicated that the pressure and heat in the furnace were increasing even after water had entered the area. It seemed unlikely unless the men were still present, tending to the fires and boilers in an effort to keep the ship going for a little while longer. Why? The reason is straightforward. As long as the engines were working, the generators continued to generate electricity. When the lights stayed on, people were able to navigate their way. When the pumps were functioning, the water flow could be controlled, even if only temporarily. Each additional minute provided by the engineers and firefighters meant another lifeboat could be filled, another child could be rescued, another mother could be guided through the dark, twisting hallways. These men provided the passengers with something invaluable: time. In the recently examined back of the Titanic, researchers found something new. Among the wreckage of twisted metal and pipes, they discovered a manual steam valve that was locked open. This valve controlled the steam flow to the dynamos which powered the ship's electrical system. Survivors had always talked about the lights staying on almost until the end, but some people thought it was just a product of fear and imagination. However, the new evidence proves that it was true. It appears that someone, possibly the chief engineer or someone he trusted, made the decision to keep that valve open. This decision ensured that the lights would continue to shine until the ship sank. Unfortunately, that decision ultimately cost them their lives. Forensic electrical engineers studying the ship's digital replica discovered fused wires and scorched junction boxes near the power stations, which were clear indications of intentional action rather than accidental fire. It was evident that someone had redirected the current through backup circuits when parts of the system failed, demonstrating a concerted effort to maintain power flow. Despite the challenging conditions of dark, freezing, and flooded rooms, someone was actively working to ensure the power remained operational. The presence of fused wires, which continued to function even as water levels rose, further supported the evidence of ongoing efforts to keep the power supply functioning. They continued moving without pausing. They also did not start running. These brave individuals who were calm and collected made a significant impact. If they had decided to stop just a little earlier, the ship's decks would have been completely dark. The screams, the fear, the chaos would have been amplified. In that darkness, people may have struggled to find their way. Lifeboats might not have been launched correctly. Children may not have been saved in time. The contrast between light and darkness determined who lived and who perished. Historians are revisiting survivor accounts from official investigations with a fresh perspective. Many survivors recall feeling a strange sense of calm on the ship's deck, as if there was still some semblance of order amidst the chaos of the sinking. This feeling of the ship being alive even as it was sinking can now be understood. Below deck, away from the pandemonium above, the engineers and firemen were diligently working to keep the ship functioning and afloat. Their efforts were not for their safety, but for the well-being of everyone else on board. Their names did not appear in the news. They were not publicly acknowledged. They were simply members of the crew. However, they were essential to the function of the Titanic. Finally, they are receiving recognition. Experts are analyzing the scans carefully to understand the timeline of events. The lower levels of the ship flooded first after it was hit by the iceberg. The crew had to work quickly to shovel coal with water rushing in. Some crew members operated the pumps in an effort to reduce the rise of seawater. Others attempted to redirect pressure to protect untouched parts of the ship. Unfortunately, their efforts were not successful, but they continued to fight against the sinking ship. The choice to intentionally keep the steam valve open was not accidental. It was a clear decision made during a chaotic situation. It was a deliberate choice made in the final moments of life. It was done by someone who was fully aware of the consequences, but still chose to do it. Survival stories from crew members provide additional insight into this tale. Walter Hurst, a trimmer who was one of the few engine room workers to survive, described the incredibly loud noise, the rushing water, and the men yelling amidst the chaos. However, he also recalled that the engineers remained composed, determined, and courageous. He noted that the lights continued to stay on, as if they were battling against the darkness. And he was correct. A recent discovery about what occurred inside the lower levels of the Titanic has shifted our previous beliefs. For over 100 years, the same inquiries were posed. Why were there not adequate lifeboats? Why was the ship traveling at a high speed? Why didn't assistance arrive promptly? However, a recent digital scan provides a new perspective by revealing who chose to remain on board. These individuals sacrificed their lives not for recognition, but for unknown passengers. The Titanic story is known for its sadness, but now there is also admiration for the brave men who made a selfless choice to help others survive during the tragedy. In the debris, there are no sounds of voices, music, or fires, just cold metal and quiet. However, within that quiet, we can now sense something different. We can feel bravery and witness loyalty. We realize that the spirit of the Titanic did not perish upon hitting the iceberg. It perished when the final crew member released the ship's controls, sacrificing everything so others could live. This is the tale of the men that were overlooked by the world, Titanic's final moments. Deep in the icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean, the Titanic rests quietly. Despite being at the bottom of the sea, the ship still has a tale to tell. A recent scan of the wreckage uncovers information that has been unknown for more than 100 years. The scan not only shows how the Titanic split apart but also sheds light on the events of its final moments. Every fragment of metal and each item scattered around tells a unique story. When put together, they provide insight into the true events of the tragic night when the Titanic sank. One of the most chilling findings is the fact that the front of the ship is deeply embedded in the ocean floor. It's not just sitting there. It has sunk almost an entire deck below the silt. It seems like the Titanic was trying to move forward even after it had already sunk. Its front end is stuck in the seabed with such force that it appears like it made a final effort to stay above water. This moment of collision provides valuable information. It demonstrates the intensity of the descent and the speed at which the ship plunged into the darkness. On the contrary, the back of the ship has a different appearance. It is severely damaged and in pieces. Instead of laying flat or sinking neatly, it crumpled in on itself like a crushed can. Decks are piled on top of each other in a twisted mess. The strength that caused it to sink was so powerful it flattened entire areas. However, even in this disorder, the wreck emits a strange energy, as if the instant of collapse is still captured in the metal. The digital scan does more than just show destruction. It tells a story of timing. By carefully examining where different parts of the ship ended up, such as coal bunkers, beds, bathtubs, staircase rails, and even bits of luggage, marine archaeologists can now reconstruct how the ship broke apart. The breakup was not fast or neat. When the stern separated from the rest of the ship, entire middle sections collapsed. These parts did not just bend. They were crushed, engulfing everything and everyone inside. The pressure was so strong that pieces of the ship were broken and thrown across a wide area. Some fragments were discovered almost 600 meters away from the main wreck. Forensic experts treat it as a mechanical autopsy, examining every detail of the wreckage for clues. These clues piece together a timeline of events by showing how the ship bent and where pressure built up. Each element of the wreckage contributes to solving the puzzle. However, the most important aspect of the investigation is not the steel itself, but the people involved. Even in complete silence inside the sunken ship, there are hints of existence. In one crew bunk room that has collapsed, the metal bed frames are twisted together, as if the people who slept in them stayed until the end. They could have chosen not to abandon their duties. They may have held on to hope of rescuing others. Their identities may remain unknown, but their courage is remembered through the remnants they left behind. A staircase that has fallen showcases the precise instant when the building surrendered. Its contorted form preserves that moment in time, capturing the despair when hope vanished. Survivors who were on the ship when it broke apart reported seeing lights flickering. They also mentioned seeing bursts of fire and smoke. Initially, many people didn't believe their accounts, but now there is concrete evidence supporting their stories. A scan of the wreckage revealed burn marks on metal, fused copper wires, and melted electric boxes. Everything on the ship came to a halt and remains frozen in time. Even in the midst of all the destruction caused by the Titanic sinking, there are indications of miraculous occurrences. Surprisingly, the front part of the ship, known as the bow, remained mostly intact despite the severe impact and flooding. This unexpected strength allowed for more time to launch lifeboats, potentially saving lives. If the bow had collapsed sooner, the death toll would have been much higher. Although the Titanic was not unsinkable, the ship's designers did imbue her with enough strength to provide a small gift of time during a tragic night of great loss. However, eventually, even the most resilient components gave out. As water flooded in, the rear of the boat started to lift out of the water. It's believed that the angle exceeded 30 degrees. This slant generated forces that were too strong to resist. The ultimate fracture started, and it wasn't just a sudden break. It was something much more devastating. As the front of the ship went underwater, air became stuck in the back. This air made the back of the ship spin out of control. Instead of just falling straight down, it twisted and turned as it sank. The impact when it hit the bottom was incredibly strong, crushing everything inside. This caused the ship to break into pieces that scattered in different directions. The area of wreckage has now been carefully documented for the first time. Small details in the wreckage still tell their sad stories. A deck chair is stuck in a twisted hallway. The Marconi room, where distress calls were made, is still there, damaged but recognizable. These small items make the tragedy feel more real. They remind us that this was not just a huge shipwreck, but a heartbreaking event with people, dreams, and final opportunities. Specialists who analyzed the 2025 scan have realized that the Titanic's sinking did not happen all at once as initially thought. Instead, it was a series of events triggered by one part failing, leading to subsequent failures. Similar to a chain reaction, each failure worsened the next. The physical evidence, such as items being thrown around and machines being twisted, along with the cracked metal beams, supports this sequential breakdown of the ship. All the details align with the progression of events during the Titanic's final moments. These new findings have provided a better understanding of the tragedy. Survivor testimonies were not believed for a long time. Witnesses who claimed to have seen the ship fracture before sinking were frequently not taken seriously. However, the computer-generated simulation confirms their accounts. The separation of the ship indeed occurred. It happened slowly and was horrifying to witness. Observers from lifeboats likely saw the ship appear as if it were being ripped apart in the darkness. The sinking of the ship's stern was extremely catastrophic. It was loud, violent, and caused complete destruction. It signaled the tragic conclusion to a series of events that started with optimism and concluded with sadness. This wasn't just a single error, but a culmination of many small choices, some commendable and others reckless. Together, they led to a situation that no one could prevent. However, there are still unanswered questions surrounding the Titanic. Certain sections of the ship's middle portion have not been located. During the scan, empty areas were identified in the wreckage zone where significant parts of the ship are expected to be, but are not present. It is possible that these sections were completely destroyed or submerged too deeply in the mud to be visible. The absence of these pieces is significant, as they may provide important information on the reasons for the ship's demise and potentially aid in avoiding similar disasters in the future. The belief that the Titanic could not sink has always been a prominent part of its history. A recent scan reveals that the safety measures like watertight compartments and a double bottom may have caused more harm than good. These features may have redirected the force in a way that ultimately led to the ship's sinking. The Titanic did not go down in one solid piece. Its strength ended up causing it to break apart in unexpected ways. This sad reality is evident in the various cracks and bends found in the wreckage. Above all, the scan shows us that the Titanic was more than just a ship. Each item found in the wreckage is a reminder of the lives that were once lived on board. A toy or a teacup found among the debris are not just objects, they hold memories and serve as reminders of the tragedy. The Titanic is not simply a tale, but a message, a tribute, a message from the depths of the ocean. Titanic's last echoes of messages and memories. As the digital scan moved slowly over the remains of the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean, it uncovered more than just metal. The underwater wreckage wasn't just debris, but a story preserved in time. Each fragment revealed something different. Every twisted beam and corroded wire held secrets that had been concealed by the ocean for a century. The discovery was more incredible than anyone could have expected. It wasn't just a story of a ship breaking in two, but a new understanding of the people involved, their bravery, their fear, their decisions, and the last moments before the tragedy. It made history come alive in a way that had never been felt before. When the scan reached the radio room, once known as the Marconi room, everything changed. There, in that small space, experts were able to trace the exact path of Titanic's final calls for help. Two young wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, sent desperate messages into the dark. The sea had already crept into the lower parts of the ship, but still, the signals went out. The scan revealed burnt relay boxes and damaged equipment, the very tools they had used. Fuses were fried and wires were tangled, coated in salt from the rising flood. Despite these challenges, they continued to make efforts to send out distress signals. As the scan moved across the destroyed devices, it was evident how intense the final moments must have been. The signals gradually weakened until they completely passed out. Instead of speculating, the truth was now clear from the remnants. The evidence left behind conveyed the story more effectively than words ever could. Close to the radio room in the officers' quarters, there was something small that caught the attention. It was a dented metal locker that was barely holding together. Inside the locker, there was a tin box with a rusty lid. Surprisingly, when the box was opened carefully, a delicate piece of paper was found inside. Despite the harsh conditions it had been through, the paper had survived the cold, water, and the passage of time. The words on the paper appeared to be from a log entry, hastily written as things were falling apart. The note mentioned flickering lights, the ship's bow already being gone, and the men still holding their positions. The small piece of paper was very significant. Even when the ship was tilting and sinking, someone took the time to write about the situation. This simple action conveyed a lot. It demonstrated a sense of responsibility. It indicated that the crew remained on board until the ship went down. They didn't flee. They didn't try to protect themselves. They bravely stayed put. The marks made by the pencil were faintly visible, showing no sign of being erased. It seemed as if time had stopped, as if you were there with the writer, hearing the sounds, feeling the chill, and witnessing history unfold before your eyes. That one piece of paper transformed a historical event from a century ago into a very personal experience. There were additional findings beyond just the rooms and machinery during the scan. The scan revealed hidden areas that were previously unreachable by humans. What do you think about the Titanic discovery? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.